It's been a wonderful journey, from the very first day that it was announced to the beta tests, from its official launch throughout every patch, all the way up until the very end. Classic WoW, leaving aside minor inconveniences, lived up to the expectations and the hype that surrounded it. And I must say that I am eternally grateful to Blizzard for giving us, the community, what we so badly wanted. And I really mean that. In spite of not necessarily liking the direction they have taken in the last decade or so, I really commend them for allowing us to once again enjoy the game we fell in love with, just as we remember it to be. Yes, there were some minor necessary changes here and there, but overall it felt like what we had been looking and hoping for all along, just to go back home. So in this video I want to commemorate the amazing experience that was Classic WoW. I will go over each and every phase, from the demo version back when it was first announced, to the beta tests a couple of months prior to the official release, the release itself, and all the way up to the release of the final phase. So I hope you enjoy it. It was a sunny day at the Anaheim Convention Center in LA. The Classic community was fed up with Blizzard because they wouldn't allow any vanilla private servers. The ending of Nostarius did really hurt, and wounds were still fresh. But rumor had it that Blizzard was about to announce the release of their very own vanilla servers. And so it came that J. Allen Bragg was tasked with delivering the good news. Yes, the same Allen Bragg that had previously pooped on vanilla when asked about the topic.
You think you do, but you don't.
But as soon as the words "my favorite flavor is vanilla" came out of his mouth, all his wrongs were instantly pardoned because the world had just exploded in pure bliss. And so the journey began. It was at that very first BlizzCon that players all over the world were able to step foot on the old Azeroth for the first time in 15 years, at least officially. Even though it was just a demo, restricted to 2 zones, the Barrens and Westfall for Horde and Alliance respectively, and you could only go from level 15 to level 19, if I remember correctly. It was the spark that was just needed to reignite the flames of nostalgia in so many players, myself included. After 2 years and many YouTube videos, the long wait was finally over, as players were ready to again step foot on Classic, this time for the beta testing. This time around you could level up from level 1, and the level cap was initially set to level 30 before being pushed further up to level 40. The beta testing in its own was a memorable chapter in the history of Classic WoW. Who could forget the times when Alliance players would walk the Eastern Kingdoms and Kalimdor in fear of being ruthlessly killed by the Uga Gang, a group of 3 shameless rogues responsible for so many awesome and unforgettable memories. And how about the memorable battles between Horde and Alliance in Hillsbrad Foothills or the Arathi Highlands? Remember the massive elite dragons randomly killing everyone and everything in Stormwind, or the stress testing with numerous raid bosses spawning in the starting areas? And finally, around 2 weeks after the beta testing was closed, on August the 26th, 2019, Classic World of Warcraft launched worldwide. The first days after launch were about as chaotic as expected. Starting zones were packed beyond belief with players who got randomly kicked out of the game, only to find themselves at the very end of a queue that could be as long as 20,000 players. In many zones, the tables had been turned. The once feared Murlocs in Elwyn Forest now didn't get to stand on their feet longer than 2 seconds before being annihilated by a horde of players hungry for levels. The race for WoW First 60 was on fire, and after less than 4 days of playtime, much faster than many had expected, a gnome mage by the name of Jokert made it happen. However, this wasn't the only feat that would make headlines, since just a day later, the first Ragnaros kill was achieved by the guild Apes from the Gehenna server in EU, quickly followed by the very first Onyxia kill the very same day. These events sparked quite a bit of discussion in the forums, with many people disappointed that the endgame wasn't as hard as they expected or remembered, especially those that hadn't been involved in the private server scene. But all in all, as the weeks went by, it was clear that Classic WoW had been a total success, bringing hundreds of thousands of returning players to the game. Blizzard's Q3 call left no doubt. World of Warcraft had doubled its subscriber base almost overnight. Classic had indeed been the right move. Such was the Classic frenzy that Blizzard decided to release Dire Maul earlier than expected, instead of releasing it along with the rest of the content in Phase 2 as it was originally planned, so that players wouldn't run out of content. However, not everything was sunshine and pretty flowers. There was also that thing called layering, which Blizzard implemented so that the game could actually be played during the initial days and weeks. Initially, layering was planned to stick around for only a couple of weeks, maybe a month at the latest. However, that goal didn't end up being quite realistic, at least for the most crowded servers, and so layering stayed in the game for quite a long time, a reality that didn't please many players due to how often it was being abused for various conveniences such as making more gold or resetting raids. Nonetheless, Blizzard did try to drop all realms to one layer only, right before the release of Phase 2, which would introduce World PvP. This caused many PvP realms to see a spectacular drop-off in player base, since it was almost impossible to do anything out in the open world without being endlessly ganked by the opposite faction, because you were basically just a walking bag of honor. This situation was especially aggravated due to the fact that Battlegrounds hadn't been released yet, effectively rendering the open world a battleground in itself, since it was the only way to gain honor and rank. On many servers suffering from faction unbalance, things derailed so badly that entire capital cities became the new playground for the opposite faction. This caused many players to get mildly upset and migrate to other servers with better perspectives. As an extreme example of this, we had the server Flamelash EU, where almost all of the Alliance player base migrated overnight. This was made easier thanks to Blizzard enabling free server transfers in an attempt to alleviate the queues that had returned after layering was temporarily removed at the start of Phase 2. Battlegrounds were rushed out before Phase 3 when they were supposed to come out in order to alleviate honor grinding in World PvP, but at that time most of the damage had already been done, many server populations had been decimated already. Phase 2 overall was unfortunately a rather negative experience for many players, and the game did really take a hit because of that. In terms of PvE, Phase 3 brought about the release of Black-Green Lair, which despite being a bit more challenging in terms of boss mechanics than Molten Core, especially the two final encounters of Romagus and Nefarian, got instantly cleared the same night of its release. This raid would also drop the final pieces of the Tier 2 armor set, which is pretty badass looking to be honest. The Darkmoon Fair was also introduced in this phase, a nice little addition to the game, offering new cosmetics, trinkets, and even a rather useful 10% damage buff, among other things. Contrary to what we're used to in retail, where the Darkmoon Fair always takes place in the same location, in Classic it constantly rotates between Elwyn Forest and Mulgore. Some players find it annoying, but to me it is just a little nice RP element that adds up to the overall Classic vibes. The real meat and potatoes of this phase, in my opinion, was the introduction of Warzone Gulch and Alterac Valley. Right off the bat, this caused most of the PvPers that had been terrorizing the open world to flock to these two battlegrounds simply because the honor gains were that much better. This turned the world from a toxic and unplayable environment into a balanced experience once again, with its fair share of PvP encounters, sure, but you could at least go about your own business again without the fear of not getting past your flight point of destination. The battlegrounds in its own were a spectacle to be seen, as players began to come up with ways to twist things into their favors so that they could farm the most amount of honor in the most efficient way possible, no matter how unfair for the opposite faction or unbalanced the game was. This compelled Blizzard to take action. In Warzone Gulch, for example, they removed the exit portals and made a few tweaks so that players couldn't do pre-made scouting anymore. There were some changes needed in Alterac Valley too, since it had ended up becoming an unfair game of pre-mates. The pre-mates came to life as a solution for the Alliance to the Horde dominance in AV, and it worked perfectly, allowing the Alliance to farm honor at an unthinkable speed since there were almost no queue time for them compared to the Horde side of things, making the average pack player go down in desperation. Overall, Phase 3 was a really good patch of content, at least compared to Phase 2, and it really helped lift up the spirits of the player base again in preparation for the long-awaited release of CG in Phase 4. Just like many other pieces of content and the other two battlegrounds, Arathi Basin was released earlier than expected, greatly helping reduce queue times for Horde players and bringing a bit more life into the overall PvP scene, which had kind of dwindled a little bit since many had already completed their ranking goals. Luckily or unfortunately, ranking in Classic never really ends, so here they went again. And as many would expect, with the new PvP content, the old drama time also came around once again. Just like with Warzone Gulch, you can freely join Arathi Basin as a pre-mate, and so it became the new go-to for pre-mates to join, effectively deleting any hopes of victory for packs, unless they encountered another pack, which was kind of difficult really. On the PvE side, things were much more chill. Solgroup was overall a really comfy raid. It was capped for 20 players, with easy encounters, maybe with the exception of Hakar, and high quality items. On top of that, it was done rather quickly, and you only had to wait 3 days for it to reset. The Emerald Dragons also made their appearance throughout Azeroth, dropping nice loot and also causing a bit of drama because of layering, which Blizzard had introduced again due to the return of extensive queues. Finally, we also got some extra content in Phase 4 that was actually meant for Phase 5, this being the introductory quests in Silithus, which would eventually reward you with some pretty nice nature resistance gear that would come in handy for the release of AQ later in Phase 5. Phase 5 introduced many new additions such as the upgraded dungeon sets, more gear with spell penetration, class books, new enchants, weapon oils, and so on. However, most of the content in this patch revolved around the new raid Ankh-Qiraj, including the war effort and the opening of the gates, or the 10-hour war. The whole event started with the gathering of various materials for the war effort such as bandages, minerals, and even various foods. Both factions had to hand in their due share of resources to proceed to the next stage of the event, which was the 10-hour war. However, this event would only start after one player in the server had completed the questline for the Scepter of the Shifting Sands, which would be used to ring the gong that would open the gates of Ankh-Qiraj and kick off the 10-hour war. The player who first completed the quest of ringing the gong would receive the legendary mount plus the title of a Scarab Lord, and whoever managed to also complete the quest within the next 10 hours after the initial gong would also get said mount and title. We saw servers where both factions made coordinated attempts to complete the war effort as fast as possible, which actually happened in a matter of hours in some servers. In other servers, however, there were factions that didn't deliver on their end of the bargain and even tried to cross the other faction by trying to hand in their resources at a more convenient time for them, which in some cases led them to get severely punished by the wrath of the other faction. These faction quarrels got drawn in time even past the war effort event in many servers, with many guilds colliding with each other and trying to prevent those from the other faction to complete the questline for the Scepter of the Shifting Sands, so that they couldn't get neither the legendary mount nor the Scarab Lord title during the 10-hour war time window. It was drama time at its finest. The new raid itself was good enough, with some bosses being a bit more challenging than in previous raids such as Viscidus or and the new raid gear gave players crazy amounts of additional power, which would be very much needed in the next and final raid of Naxxramas in Phase 6. Phase 6 was the last phase for Classic WoW, and its main attraction was of course Naxxramas, the long awaited last raid from the vanilla era that very few people got to experience and even fewer people managed to finish. And precisely because of this, there was a certain mystique around the necropolis. Many private servers had their own version of the raid, but no one really knew or remembered how the authentic Blizz-like version of Naxx would be. It was clear that the raid's difficulty was going to be at a whole new level, but still many predicted that things would go down the same way it happened with previous raids, where expectations of their difficulty didn't match reality since they were all completed with relative ease. In a way, Naxxramas also subverted players' expectations, just not the way they thought it would be. Naxxramas proved to be a much bigger challenge than anticipated, not only because of its more elaborate boss mechanics, but also due to the high gold and time-consuming preparation that was needed just to stand a chance at progressing. Many guilds that up until then had had no problem in completing previous raids in a matter of hours after their release now saw themselves hopelessly wiping for hours in the same boss. Many other guilds also had to clear their ranks from players that had been there only for the ride all along but were not putting in the effort, while others ended up disbanding altogether. At the end, the number of guilds that had managed to defeat Kel'Thuzad after the first reset was much lower than what we were used to in previous raids. On the bright side, the added difficulty was also a welcomed change, at least just for the sake of pepping things up a bit. For many players, the prospect of dying more often and more easily if they didn't prepare and do their homework accordingly was rather a breath of fresh air. A fact that was kind of stained by the huge gold things that had to be made in order to purchase consumables. But overall, this was a great nostalgic last phase for Classic WoW. On the one hand, it was exciting, but on the other hand, it was also kind of sad, because it also means that this was the end of a chapter, the end of a journey that you have very much enjoyed. And while the journey will continue onward with TBC and then probably the Lich King, I can't help but look back with nostalgia at all the memories that we had in a game that was meant to satiate our previous feeling of nostalgia, so it was truly a wonderful experience, one that hopefully we will get to relive sometime in the future. Now that Classic WoW is over, we are in the beginnings of a new era, the TBC Classic era, which promises to be a hell of a journey. There are some elements that have changed from Classic Vanilla to Classic TBC which are totally worth discussing, but I will leave those for another video. It certainly looks like we might get Wrath of the Lich King Classic after TBC Classic wraps up, so I'm really looking forward to that. I also wonder, if Blizzard decides to release fresh Classic servers, when will it be? I have read comments of people saying that it will make the most sense right after Classic Lich King wraps up. It could definitely be possible. We also don't really know what road Blizzard is going to take with the Classic Legacy. Maybe we will get BFA Classic. Fancy some island expeditions? Jokes aside, that time frame for a re-release of Vanilla Classic seems plausible. Although I really hope we don't have to wait that much. I don't know, I guess this is just food for thought at this point in time. You can let me know what you think would be the best time for the release of fresh Classic servers, in case you are interested in them at all. Alright, I think this is it for this video. It's pretty long already. Gonna take me forever to edit and put everything in place. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, you could also do me a little favor and give it a like. That will go a long way, so thank you. There are more videos coming soon with a more cohesive uploading schedule, so I'm looking forward to those. I hope you are too. With that being said, I hope to see you all soon. Take care. Bye.